Israel back in the news as it always is, but this time perhaps in a different way. This is one of those moments where it's like very, very difficult to have the feeling of vindication on anything, in part because the enormous human suffering that is taking place in Gaza continues seemingly without end, certainly as I record this today. And more to the point, there is still enough resistance to how we got to this position and frankly the acknowledgement of even what it means that you can't really be like, aha, see, I told you so. I mean, I can say, and many of us can say, see, we told you so, and I will, but it doesn't carry the weight that I would hope that it would, and I don't think that it does at the present moment. I wonder at some point in the future it will, but as I speak to you today, I'm not sure about it. But let's actually get to what we're talking about here. Namely, first, a couple of issues on the agenda related to Israel, but number one, there was a report yesterday from Channel 12 out of Benjamin Netanyahu's office that they just straight up plan to occupy fully the Gaza Strip. Like the Israeli military is going to go into the Gaza Strip, they're going to control it, they're going to occupy it. And of course they are, right? Of course they are. First of all, let's take a look at the report. Okay, obviously the original text from Channel 12 is in Hebrew, but drop site, great site by the way, they have the translation from a senior official in Netanyahu's office says, quote, "We are moving to occupy the strip. The decision has been made. Hamas will not release more hostages without complete surrender, and we will not surrender. If we do not act now, the hostages will die of starvation, and Gaza will remain under Hamas control." Now, obviously, their reasoning is totally absurd and has nothing to do with the actual reality of it all, but this is what I want to get to. Folks like me and other ones out there have been saying since the beginning the plan is not to bomb Gaza and destroy it in the way that they are just to give it back to the Palestinians. Forget about Hamas. Hamas has even said many times and has offered many times they don't even want to be in power anymore. They are absolutely willing and frankly have encouraged giving up control. But of course, that narrative is not convenient for Netanyahu or his office or his ambitions. So they just, essentially ignored, or they don't really accede to it. The point I'm trying to make is, look at the way in which they have destroyed this place. They didn't destroy, they have, Hamas has, like the Al Shifa hospital. They have apparently some, underground complex under everything that matters. But the reality of what they've done is that they've just destroyed everything to the point where they've destroyed desalination plants. They've destroyed electricity plants, the things that are built for civilian infrastructure and life, wastewater treatments. They've destroyed schools, mosques. They've destroyed universities. They've destroyed all the different parts of life, from the infrastructure that builds and gives rise to life, to the actual meeting spaces themselves, to the other parts that groom the next generation for social and political development. They've destroyed all of it. They've destroyed all of it. And it has been very, very clear that they were going the extra mile to destroy those things from a very, very early date. This is not something that they ramped up more recently in the last almost 2 years around this. This is something that's been really targeted essentially from the initial response to October 7 itself. And folks like me and other ones out there, it's not like, it sounds like a giant pat on the back session, for which I apologize, but it's just so frustrating. We've had to deal with, the Hamas could just release the hostages and they would, it would be all over, when in fact they have decided that they could give up, and wanted to give up power and would be happy to return all the hostages, but that would require, under those plans, on some level, Gaza being returned to the Palestinians. And that is simply what Israel has never, ever wanted. Certainly not under Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, of course, his situation is, there's an additional level of difficulty added to all of this because he has his own corruption issues. And so making partnership with the extremist elements of his coalition to avoid staying out of jail has also complicated this. But there have been numerous, I don't know if I would even call it leaks, just different parts of the Israeli government, particularly those kinds of leaders and some of the ministers in Netanyahu's inner circle, essentially, who have been very clear that this was the plan all along. I mean, just think about it more rationally. They're uprooting and destroying every part of life: electricity plants, university, schools, mosques, hospitals, again, desalination plants, everything that you could ever need to build a life there. And then more importantly, understand that there's all this there's ordnance that hasn't been blown up fully yet. That's just kind of sitting through all of that. That's going to have to be taken care of. More to the point, they have kept out journalists from Western news agencies for basically the entirety of this entire conflict to not let folks see what actually is happening here, right? And I suspect that going in there and then forcibly removing everybody, just straight up, like what they'd announced is just straight up ethnic cleansing. That's what they're trying to do. So on the one hand, they're just destroying all the factors of life that are required to be there. And again, you have this other issue of this unexploded ordinance that's going to have to be cleared. You've got this sort of like veil of secrecy over everything. My and obviously Trump going out there and be like, "Oh, we're going to turn the Gaza into the Riviera." This is all part of a broader plan. But the point I'm trying to make is it all helps them both to forcibly remove all of the populations and then to keep a lid on what I think the final death tally might actually be. I mean, right? Like if you kick out all the Palestinians, who is going to be there to do the appropriate accounting of what the actual death toll ends up being, right? So it's all kind of related to all of that. But I want to be clear about something like this thing, like, oh, they just ended up in a place where in August of 2025, they just decided they had to invade and take over Gaza completely. When in fact, we know this for a fact. In November of 2023, Bezalel Smotrich, who was the finance minister, said Gaza was going to, that Gaza should be under complete Israeli control. He promoted obviously immigration and then this very destructive rhetoric. You had Amahai Eliyahu in December of 2023 called for the full occupation and settlements into Gaza. Amahai, forgive me for the pronunciation of the name, Chikli, a minister in January of 2024, suggested that Gaza be controlled by Israel or other international powers. How about Itamar Ben-Gvir, a famous figure in this and an absolutely disreputable one, if ever there was, back in January of 2024, advocated for migration and, of course, the restructuring of the population. Yoav Gallant, former defense minister, said that Gaza is going to be under military administration and total control. I mean, need I say more about Benjamin Netanyahu? And I could go on down the list from you name it, names you haven't even heard of that would all basically marching to the same kind of drumbeat and laying the groundwork. They were bombing this way from the beginning. They were attacking this way from the beginning. They were destroying anything tied to human life in this area, while at the same time the folks in government were saying and kind of leading what the real objective was here. They don't wish to give this back. They wish to kick the Palestinians out, kill as many of them as they need to, move the rest out, and then own the space. And of course, as you know, the West Bank is next. I'm just going to talk over this. Look at this. Otherworldly, yet it is not. It is in this world. It is this world, excuse me. And what is happening may yet come to define one of the darkest eras, one that casts a stain on humanity that will endure for generations. Dude, look at this place. Look at this place. This place was described as an open air prison prior to any of this destruction. It was not like it was doing the best that it could have, but it did have life. It did have civilization. It did have order. And now it has been turned into ash. And what they want to do is not return people to these buildings that you see here and not return people to the places where they're from. They wish to either kill them or move them out of there. And of course, this is I believe, a Jordanian. This is look, you can see old. This is what Gaza used to look like. You could see here again, teeming with life. I mean, it's not Beverly Hills, but it was certainly some level of modernity involved. And this is just the destruction of everything. Israel essentially left Gaza completely to the Palestinians. Again, they were utterly controlled, and the whole reason why Hamas engaged in the horrific attack that they engaged in was, as a pushback against apartheid. But Israel left in 2005, and I think that there's a lot of folks clearly who believe that they never should have left. They should have never been handed over to the Gazans. It should have never been ruled by Hamas. It should have never had anything other than total Israeli control, and that's exactly what they're trying to go back to now. Now, there's a second component to all of yesterday's news, which is it got around, if you can believe it or not, that through a DHS memo, a Department of Homeland Security memo, that states or cities that engage in any kind of boycotting of not just the Israeli government or any kind of Israeli government, work or relationships, but even the Israeli companies, right? Even that, they would not be entitled to various forms of disaster relief. And as you can imagine, this caused an enormous blowback, not just on the left, but actually the right. So what they ended up doing was taking the provision explicitly out, but then backdooring it another way. Take a look at this. So here's the original version on the left side of your screen. That was the original sort of part of the memo quote from section D. Discriminatory prohibited boycott means refusing to deal, cutting commercial relations, and otherwise limiting commercial relations, specifically with Israeli companies or with companies doing business in or with Israel or authorized by, licensed by, or organized under the laws of Israel to do business. And then, of course, have this, the subheading 2 on section A of part number 2. They do not engage in and will not, during this term of this award, engages in a discriminatory prohibited boycott. Now, the new language is they do not engage in and will not, during the term of this award, engage in a discriminatory prohibited boycott. So they took out a lot of the language. However, check this out if you can. And let's go back here a little bit. They revised it, but now you've got Dominic Michael Trippi reporting, quote, DHS flagged for misleading post as the restriction of disaster relief for states and cities who boycott Israel still stands. The reworded document includes discriminatory prohibited boycotts, which means the ban still applies, and they got community noted here as a consequence. Cigar and Jetty also reported something similar, where they took out this specific proviso related to Israel, but that they're basically just going to backdoor it anyway, under a sort of a more inclusive way of describing the language through, the boycotting language or anti-discriminatory language, but not mentioning Israel specifically. But the fact that he even mentioned, like, do we even understand where we are today and how absolutely insane? Need I tell you more? What on earth does that have to do with America First? What on earth does fealty to a pariah nation of increasingly strategic and dubious value in terms of a partnership or alliance with the United States, what on earth is forced fealty to that have anything to do with the promotion of my interests, your interest, or more broadly, our collective interest? Of course, the answer is nothing. The answer is nothing, or very, very little anyway, right? It is absolutely the mark of insanity that we are required, in order to receive federal funds. And understand something. There was a story that recently that happened in Maryland. It wasn't related to Israeli boycotts. It didn't happen that way. But what ended up happening was there were a couple of counties that had some really bad flooding in Maryland. And these particular counties, now the broader congressional district is one that is run by a Democrat, but the two counties themselves that were affected, Allegheny, I believe, was one of them, were hardcore Trump districts. And they applied for federal disaster relief after some pretty devastating flooding, and they were denied. And it left these people wondering, like, why did this happen? Now, again, that is not in any way related to these Israeli boycott language, or whether it's backdoored or otherwise, but this, like, this inability of the federal government to assuage the needs of its needy citizens. And again, while you might say, well, okay, those counties are, Trump counties, they do have a Democratic congressman and they do have a Democratic mayor. And so you have to ask yourself, are we now at the point where we're punishing citizens, including those who might be sympathetic to the president, in order to punish political opposition, not even related to domestic political opposition, but any kind of perceived political opposition, now to a foreign country? Oh my God. Oh my God. It is so nakedly unjustifiable. It is so nakedly insane. It is so obviously out to lunch. I barely even know what to say to something like this anymore, except that whatever it is certainly not America first. And more to the point, what is it that this government believes the long-term consequence of this will be? That you can just arm twist people into liking a genocidal state? You can just force this on them? They already had to remove the language because even members of the right were appalled by this. Although I did see some being like, "Hey, they're only going to weaponize this against blue cities and blue states. What do we care?" It's like, oh my god, like the sense of American solidarity itself has, I mean, it's already been under attack for quite some time. But I mean, what's left of the husk and the carcass itself is still falling apart here, obviously. But the point I'm trying to drive home to you is, what is the long-term consequence of this going to be? You are making people question the United States' relationship to the world. If we're the only ones propping up something so nakedly horrendous, and we are doing it to the point where we're punishing our own citizens for that, because who knows if they're even going to apply this, boycotting and or this language, that even the modified language, in some kind of way that's even like remotely fair itself. They might just, any kind of pretext by which they wish to do that. And to say nothing of what they're doing on college campuses and then locking up green card holders for writing op-eds. Like, civil liberties here are being affected by it. Quality of life and the ability for the government to meaningfully address the needs, while it can, of desperate people is being affected here by forced fealty to there. How is it possible that the people in government think that you can do this and the only consequence would be people just all of a sudden like it? Whereas what I think the real consequence is going to be is people looking around and saying, why are we the only ones who have this kind of relationship to a nation that is bombing 5 of its neighbors? Why are we the only ones propping this up? I mean, yes, there's vast parts of Europe, but they're not really delivering what we're doing. Like, why are we so central to this equation? What are we getting out of it? They're forcing a recognition about what the actual value of the strategic alliance is, which is minimal at this point. And more, who are we in the world and to the world if this is who we're supporting? That's what's going to happen. People don't want this shoved down their throat and made it a condition to get disaster relief. The only consequence long term is repudiation. That's not me telling you that like I can make everyone doing it. That's just me predicting what is quite obviously going to happen here. So like if you watch a genocide on your phone or on your screen, and then you're like, wow, I don't really want to support the companies for that. And there's a mudslide in your neighborhood, and your decision to boycott it, assuming that there's, a broader movement that you may have, I found this out like going into my Trader Joe's. They handed me a flyer. I'm not going to do that anymore. You as an American, you might not get any help. If your Congress, even if you supported Trump and your congressman or your elected representative is a Democrat, you might not get any help because the help is for their political coalition first and then Israel after that. And wherever you fit beyond that is really the only question left. But it ain't on par with the other Americans, and it's probably not even on par with the other Israelis. It's somewhere after that. It's the opposite of America first. It's that political coalition first. Everyone else be damned. And we're going to use the muscle of the American government to enforce it. It is so morally heinous. It is so politically destructive. And it's so insanely poisonous to any kind of shared notion of national identity and a shared future. I barely even know what to say anymore.